In the Columbia Law Review called The Overproduction of Death.
You can see all this segment in the C-SPAN video library at cspan.org. The U.S. Senate is gaveling back in now for general speeches until a recess at 3:30 for a military briefing with Defense Secretary Leon Panetta.
A civics teacher in my state of Florida who tried to help her students register to vote. It was nothing new for this teacher, Jill Cicerelli, to be prepping 17-year-old students for the privileges and responsibilities of voting in a democracy. She's been doing this for a number of years, but it turned out that when Jill organized a drive at the start of the school year to get students pre-registered to vote, she ran afoul of Florida's new election law. How could that be? But sure enough, the law that is basically an attempt at voter suppression it causes her to face hefty fines under the law. And for what, Mr. President? For helping students to register to vote. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's what the law says. But there's more, unfortunately, Mr. President. There's a lot more. When I met with Jill Cicerelli and her students last week, they are extremely concerned and they're extremely surprised that a good government attempt to register students so that they will be ready to vote in the next election, that they've run afoul of the law. Now, they weren't happy, but interestingly, neither was their elected supervisor of elections in Volusia County, who under the law was required to report the teacher and the students to the state authorities. And the supervisor of election, Ann McFall, she has now publicly, openly criticized the parts of the law as egregious and unenforceable. She's done that speaking out. She's done it in an op-ed in the local newspaper. She has been unambiguous in her criticism that not only is it egregious in the substance of the law, but that the burdens that they place on the supervisors of election are unenforceable. Well, I have written to Governor Scott. I have talked to him personally, asking him to support the revamping or the repealing of this law. And I've also just asked the Senate Judiciary Committee to conduct a congressional investigation to see if Florida's law was part of an orchestrated effort that resulted in voting law changes in 14 states thus far this year. These new voting laws could make it significantly harder for more than 5 million eligible voters in many states to cast their ballots in next year's election in 2012. And that's according to the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University School of Law. Last month, they completed the list in a comprehensive study of those states' laws' impact. Now, the Florida law is probably the strongest of all the 14 states. It requires third parties who sign up new voters to register with the state first and then to submit applications from the new voters for registration within 48 hours. For almost 4 decades, the Florida law has been that they had 10 days in order to submit the names for 4 decades. Now, it's within 48 hours. can anybody with a straight face really say that Florida isn't taking a step backwards in making it harder to vote and harder to register to vote and harder to have your vote counted as you intended? Especially a step backwards when it involves protecting one of our most fundamental rights, the right to vote. I hope that people are going to start to realize that this is not just happening in Florida, but that a number of states have passed laws that are going to make it harder to vote and for people to cast their ballots. And we simply should not sit back and watch as a handful of lawmakers and governors approving this legislation in those states continue to block the path of voters to the polls. You think back in history, Lyndon Johnson as president, that day there were poll taxes and literacy tests aimed at blocking African Americans from voting. President Johnson went on TV and he spoke to the nation about passing civil rights laws for African Americans, including the right to vote. He told us, we are going to give them that right. Well, if he were alive today, I wonder what he would think watching as these legislatures across the country, in what the Miami Herald recently called a disturbing trend, have passed laws that place unnecessary hurdles between the voting booth and minorities, between the voting booth and young voters, and between the voting booth and seniors. In Florida, this so-called election reform law rapidly made its way as a legislative bill into law this past spring, despite the public outcry as the legislature was considering it. Now, here's what it does. It reduces the number of early voting days from 14 to 8. And, of course, it was explained in the guise, well, the supervisors of election can increase the voting hours in those days. But when they do that, they have to pay overtime, time and a half. And look at the budgets of all the states and the counties. They are in distress, and so they're not going to have the money to do it. So, in effect, it's reduced it from 14 days early voting to 8 days. Why was that ever instituted early voting in the first place? Remember the debacle that we had in the presidential election in Florida in the year 2000? And as a result, there was an effort to increase the number of days so that it would make it a convenience and make it easier to vote. 14 days, constricted to 8. And oh, by the way, always the 14 days had gone all the way up through the Sunday before the Tuesday election. The new election law in Florida stops it on the Saturday before the Tuesday election. Well, guess who that's going to hurt? What group do you think goes in record numbers to vote on the Sunday after church on the Sunday before the Tuesday election? So election laws that were set up to make it easier to vote for seniors, for many others, so much so that it was such a tremendous success in the last several elections where 40% of all the people voted before Election Day. You can imagine the administrative help that was, that only 60% of the people are voting on Election Day. But that's constricted under the theory that it was going to stop election fraud. By the way, there's been very little election law fraud reported in Florida in other states, and so this is a completely, Mr. President, you look like you want to speak to me.
Senator's 10 minutes has expired.
I would ask consent for an additional 5 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection. Ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. So that is a false argument, Mr. President, that it is going to cause any improvement on voter fraud. There's just hardly any voter fraud. All right, that's one thing that the new election law does. What's another thing? Well, it makes it harder if you move your residence to another county in Florida. As a matter of fact, if you move to another county, you register to vote in that county, but you have an identification like your driver's license that shows that you have an address in another county where you came from, if the two don't match up, you're not going to get a ballot. You're going to get a provisional ballot. And sadly, what we know from the experience of provisional ballots in the year 2008 presidential election, half in Florida of the provisional ballots were not counted. Well, what group is that going to affect? Did you hear about how young people and college students got so interested in government and politics that they went to the polls in record numbers? And where did they vote? A lot of them got interested while they were away at their college and university, and they registered to vote. And they voted in record numbers. Don't we want to encourage that? No, not this election law. This election law says when that college student shows up because they've suddenly gotten energized and they've registered to vote in that county where they go to school, but they pull out their identification, and it's their driver's license, and their driver's license has their parents' address back home in another county, they're not going to get a ballot. They're going to get a provisional ballot. Now, is this the kind of nonsense that we want going on? Well, it's happening in front of our eyes, and it's happening in the state of Florida. Let me tell you what else it does. It subjects voter registration drives to red tape and even fines up to $1,000 per person. So much so that the League of Women Voters was forced to abandon its registration drives after doing it in our state for 72 years. What does the law do? It says if you are going to register somebody to vote, you first have to register with the state of Florida that you're going to be a third-party registrar, and that when you register those names, you got to turn them in to the supervisor's office within 48 hours. Why, for 4 decades, has the law been that you had 10 days to do it, to turn them in? But now, if you don't get it in by the 48th hour and 1 minute, you are now subject to fines of $50 per registration, up to $1,000 that you could be fined. Thus, the case of the teacher at New Smyrna Beach High School, Jill Cicerelli, who had pre-registered her students and had held the registrations more than 48 hours. Now, of course, Jill didn't even know about the law. Well, look what the Orlando Sentinel said about it. This is about the new election law. It amounts to ripping apart election laws and weakening democracy. And look what the Tampa Tribune said. This bill isn't fooling anybody. It's not about clean elections. And look what the Florida Today, a Gannett newspaper, said. It called the law an assault on the most cherished of American rights. Mr. President, I see that you're calling my time. May I have and ask consent for 2 more minutes?
Is there objection? Without objection, sir.
Mr. President, no state should have the right to make a law if it abridges people's basic rights. I have requested the Department of Justice to look into that. I've requested this several months ago, and Mr. President, at this moment, I can't tell you to what degree the Department of Justice is questioning this. They have been engaged in a lawsuit because the state of Florida has sued them. The state of Florida suing them to invalidate the entire Voting Rights Act of 1965, if you can believe that. Look back in history. After being arrested for casting an illegal vote in the presidential election in 1872, Susan B. Anthony, a school teacher, called it a downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty while they are being denied the use of the only means of securing them, and that's the ballot. And that's what Florida's new election law and others like it around the nation are, a downright mockery. And so, Mr. President, Dr. King said he warned Americans that all types of conniving methods can be used to keep people from being registered voters. That's what these new so-called election reform laws amount to. Democracy turned upside down. Mr. President, I hope the Senate will look at this, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, later this month, the anticipated Special Joint Committee will be issuing its recommendations. The Special Joint Committee was set up for us to get recommendations on dealing with our economic problems and our budget deficit. I just want to share with my colleagues 2 points that I think are critically important that I hope will come out of this Special Joint Committee. First, I hope this Joint Committee will provide the way that we can advance an agenda that will create jobs in our community. And secondly, I hope that this Special Joint Committee will come forward with a comprehensive and balanced approach for us to deal with our unsustainable budget deficits that we currently have. So let me talk about the first issue, creating jobs. President Obama came forward with a job initiative that I really do believe is entitled to debate on the floor of this body, and I would hope passage. President Obama brought forward a bill that deals with rebuilding America so that we could have the types of roads and bridges and water infrastructure and energy infrastructure that allows America to compete, at the same time creating jobs. He's offered proposals that will help small businesses because we know that the small businesses represent the economic engine of America, where more jobs will be created, where more innovation occurs. He understands that and is encouraging us to do more to help small businesses. The President's proposal deals with our men and women in the military service who are coming back from Iraq and coming back from Afghanistan to have jobs available. Mr. President, yesterday I was at BWI Airport as our returning soldiers came back from being in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they want jobs. And the President's initiative says, look, let's make sure that we have jobs for our returning soldiers. All that means that we're going to create more jobs. And the Joint Committee needs to make sure that in its recommendations that we have the wherewithal to move this nation forward by creating jobs. The President's proposal has been evaluated by independent economists. Mark Zandi, who was Senator McCain's economic advisor in his presidential campaign, points out that the President's proposal would increase our gross domestic product by 2% and create 1.9 million additional jobs. And the President's proposal was completely paid for, so it adds nothing to the deficit. Now, I must tell you, if we're going to be able to balance our budget, if we're going to be able to get our budget into better shape, we have to have more jobs. Less people using governmental services, more people paying revenues or taxes into our system. The more people that are working, the better our budgets will come into balance. Now, I know some here are saying, look, there's a better way of doing it. Well, come forward with a better way of doing it. I would challenge, particularly my Republican colleagues, if you have a better way, come forward with a proposal that creates at least 1.9 million jobs and does it without adding to the budget deficit. That's the proposal that we had before us. I'm asking the Joint Committee to make sure that they provide in their recommendations a way that we can create jobs so that we can deal with our budget deficit. The second point I want to make is that I would hope that the Joint Committee's recommendations would be comprehensive and balanced. Some call that the shared sacrifice. Now, I know these numbers can sort of be used any way you want to, but the groups that have looked at this, the Simpson-Bowles group and others, say, look, we need to reduce the deficit over the next 10 years by about $4 trillion. I think that's a number that we should meet. I would hope the Joint Committee would come in with the $4 trillion of deficit reduction over the next 10 years. We've already done the first trillion. We did that when we raised the debt limit in August. Now we need to look at another $3 trillion. I would hope that they would do it. It starts with a realistic baseline. What does that mean? It means what numbers are we using in order to determine whether we actually get to that $4 trillion of deficit reduction? What baseline do we use in order to determine the revenue base in which we start these discussions? And I would suggest we need a realistic baseline. And I was impressed by the work of the Simpson-Bowles Commission. I was impressed by the work of our colleagues in the Senate, the so-called Gang of Six, in which I must tell you the overwhelming majority of the colleagues in the Senate have at least agreed to the basis of what the Gang of Six were working, what they're trying to do. It uses a realistic baseline, so it assumes that some of the tax provisions will be extended, but not all. It also assumes that we have to bring in additional revenues beyond that. Now, quite frankly, the number that we've been talking about is that we need about $1.2 trillion out of this $4 trillion package in realistic revenues using a realistic baseline. And that can be gotten. That's not so difficult to get. When you realize that all of the tax deductions, exemptions, and credits equal as much revenue as we bring in our tax code. Another way to say that is if we eliminate all the exemptions, the deductions, and credits, we could have tax rates 1/2 of what our current tax rates are. Now, what we're suggesting is that there are certain loopholes that are in the tax code that benefit special interest corporations. They need to be eliminated. They need to be eliminated. And everyone has to pay their fair share. We can't just attack the middle-class families. There was an article in the Baltimore Sun this past week that showed that during this recession, the number of people earning more than $1 million has grown dramatically. And there have been economic studies that have shown that the wealthiest in America during these economic times have done very, very well. Their incomes have grown at a faster rate than other Americans, the middle-class families. Middle-class families are falling behind. So all we're suggesting is that when we look at how we get the revenue, let's make sure it's fair and we don't, again, penalize the middle-class families. Let's make sure those who earn over $1 million pay their fair share towards this comprehensive and balanced approach. And that's what we're asking the Joint Committee to come in with. Come in with proposals that are fair or balanced. Make sure everybody pays their fair share, including those who have done extremely well during this economic recession, those who have made over $1 million of income. I must tell you, everyone needs to be part of the equation. We understand that. We have to have what's so-called shared sacrifice. I've taken the floor before to talk about our federal employees, and everybody say, well, you know, the federal employees have to help contribute to this deficit also. Well, our federal employees understand that. They've already contributed. They were the first to do that. 2 years of pay freezes. And I might tell you, we're asking them to do more with less people. We've cut their budgets, and we've given them more work. and we've told them 2 years with a pay freeze. To me, our federal employees have already contributed to the deficit reduction numbers, and they shouldn't be picked on again. Mr. President, I believe we can come together, and we need to have a comprehensive and balanced approach that allows America to be able to create more jobs. That's what we need to do as a nation. If we come together, I am convinced that it will instill confidence among the American consumers, among American investors, and our economy will take off. And it's going to be good for everyone in this nation. I hope that this month we will see the Joint Committee come in with such recommendations that will be balanced, will be fair, and will allow us to create more jobs for Americans. And with that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
All but four.
We're in a quorum call.
I ask consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, 11 days ago, all but four of the Republicans in this body filibustered a common-sense piece of legislation that would have created a national commission designed to bring together some of the best minds in America to examine our broken and frequently dysfunctional criminal justice system and to make recommendations as to how we can make it more effective, more fair, and more cost-efficient. This legislation was a product of more than 4 years of effort. It was paid for. It would have gone out of business after 18 months. It was balanced philosophically. It guaranteed equal representation among Democrats and Republicans in its membership. It was endorsed by 70 organizations from across the country and from across the philosophical spectrum, from the National Sheriff's Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, to the ACLU, the U.S. Conference on Mayors, and the Sentencing Project. I must say that at first I was stunned at the filibuster at the hands of 43 Republicans. But on the other hand, Mr. President, it's impossible not to notice over the past 2 years the lamentable decline in bipartisan behavior in this body, even in addressing serious issues of actual governance. I say this with a great deal of regret, both personally and politically. I think I can fairly say that there's no one in this chamber who has tried harder to work across party lines. In fact, one of my Republican friends joked not long ago that I was the only, quote, non-political member of the Senate. I spent 4 years in the Reagan administration as an Assistant Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Navy. Proud of that. I consciously sought out Senators John Warner and Chuck Hagel as 2 of my 3 principal co-sponsors when I introduced the post-9/11 GI Bill. I voted with the Republicans 17 times during the health care debate. I was the only member of Congress in either party or in either house to send a letter to President Obama when he claimed he would come back from the climate change summit in Copenhagen with a politically binding agreement, stating my belief that the President did not have the constitutional authority to bind the American people to an international agreement without the approval of the Congress. I've taken issue with this administration with respect to closing down our facilities at Guantanamo. I've consistently opposed any tax increases on ordinary earned income. And I took that same bipartisan approach when I introduced the Criminal Justice Commission bill in 2009, obtaining the co-sponsorship of a number of Republicans, including Senators Lindsey Graham and Orrin Hatch, both of whom serve on the Judiciary Committee. The filibuster of a common-sense measure that might assist this nation in resolving the national disgrace that now comprises our criminal justice system is a sad metaphor for the obstructionism that is too frequently replacing common-sense leadership in our national debate. We spent more than 4 years reaching out to all sides of the philosophical spectrum. We worked with liberals. We worked with conservatives. We worked with law enforcement. We sought the views of many Republicans, and we also worked in close coordination with the other body. And toward that end, it's interesting to note that in the last Congress, the House of Representatives approved the same legislation by a voice vote. It was not even considered controversial. In fact, Congressman Lamar Smith, a Republican, now the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, was a co-sponsor of the legislation. But let's speak frankly, Mr. President. In the aftermath of the 2010 elections and in anticipation of the 2012 presidential election, the mood in this historic body has frequently become nothing short of toxic. And in that environment, even this carefully developed and much-needed legislation is suddenly considered controversial. And not only controversial, it was also alleged to be unconstitutional. Just before the vote, Senator Coburn of Oklahoma said, quote, "We're absolutely ignoring the U.S. Constitution if you do this." Senator Hutchison from Texas said this was, quote, "the most massive encroachment on states' rights I have seen in this body." Now, Mr. President, in all due respect, I'm pretty comfortable with the legal education that I received at the Georgetown University Law Center. I care a lot about the Constitution. I keep a copy of the Constitution on my desk. I refer to it frequently. I think I have a pretty good idea of what is in it and what is not. And there is nothing in the Constitution that precludes the Congress from asking some of the best minds in America to come together and to give us advice and recommendations on the entire gamut of challenges that face our criminal justice system. Certain senators may not like that idea. That is their prerogative. They may not even want to hear the advice. They may not even want to believe that there is a problem in our criminal justice system. But to claim that the Constitution precludes this process is nothing short of absurd. In fact, our national leadership has received such advice before, most notably in 1965, during the Johnson administration, which is the last time we have had a comprehensive examination of our criminal justice system. And I am not alone in this judgment, Mr. President. Over the past 11 days, there have been a number of editorials and articles pointing out the unfortunate nature of this filibuster. Sunday, masthead editorial, New York Times. Sunday, masthead editorial, Washington Post. Very observant article in Politico, the day of the vote. Editorial, Newsday. Lead editorial, the Virginian Pilot, in my home state, Senate negligence on crime reform. And very interestingly, an article in the National Review, one of the most conservative magazines in the United States, titled "An Absolute Scandal." First sentence saying, the insane refusal of 43 Senate Republicans to back the National Criminal Justice Act. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that all of these articles appear at the end of my remarks in the congressional record today.
Without objection.
Mr. President, for nearly 2 years, our legislative process has too often become sidetracked by what can only be termed an indiscriminate obstructionism. A lot of good ideas have fallen by the wayside, having become hostages in the larger debate about who should comprise our national leadership and how we should solve long-term problems such as our fiscal crisis. This larger debate has affected the willingness of many in the other party to come together and address a number of serious issues of governance that should be resolved no matter who is president and no matter how we end up addressing the economy. And I would ask my friends on the other side of the aisle to think hard about the overwhelming frustration across our country with the persistent failure of the Congress to address these kinds of issues. Nowhere is the need to think creatively for the good of the country more clear than where it affects our dysfunctional criminal justice system, whose challenges threaten the safety and the well-being of every single community and every single American. This system will not be fixed by sticking our heads in the sand and pretending not to see its failings. It will only be fixed by bringing together good minds who have dedicated years of thought and action to finding answers, and that's what we've been trying to do, Mr. President. Unfortunately, that's what we were stopped from doing by this filibuster. People in this country are looking for leadership, and obstructionism is not leadership. We will continue to pursue this effort, and I would ask my Republican colleagues to join the unanimous position of the Democratic Party as we do. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.